Hello, everyone. Welcome to 90 Day Truth Files. Real stories, real truth. Subscribe now. Then any fight they'd ever had. Out of nowhere, Andrei dropped the kind of emotional bomb that makes silence louder than a scream. Elizabeth froze. This wasn't an argument. This was him pulling the rug out from under a marriage fans had built up as bulletproof, and doing it with eyes that looked like they'd already let go. Welcome to Drama Live. I'm Sabrina. And if you thought this couple was the emotional anchor in Dot's storm of chaos, buckle up. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and drop your raw take in the comments because what you thought you knew about Elizabeth and Andrei is about to be flipped, shaken, and dragged through every hard truth they didn't show you on camera on a show littered with shady texts, cheating rumors, and toxic screaming matches. These two were supposed to be different. They made it through her family's mess, green card stress, parenthood, culture clashes, even the kind of on-air fights that would have tanked most couples. Fans didn't always like Andrei's attitude. But one thing was loud and clear. They were still together. Until the mask cracked. Andrei asked for a divorce. Not during a blow-up, not after a scandal. In a quiet moment when the only thing louder than his words was Elizabeth's heartbeat. One minute they were sitting down for what she thought would be a normal conversation about vacation plans, and the next her marriage. The stability she built her whole future around was slipping out from under her in real time. Andrei didn't yell. He didn't throw accusations. No listing of crimes. He just said it calm, cold, like it had been sitting in him for months, maybe longer. That's what made it worse, because behind every perfectly filtered photo, every power couple caption, every family vlog showing laughter and milestones, there was this. A husband emotionally gone. A wife piecing together why he stopped looking at her like she was home. And here's the twist. No one saw it coming. Not the cast, not production, and definitely not Elizabeth. But now behind the scenes, the cracks were everywhere. And coming up were pulling receipts, footage, accounts from people close to them, because the moment he said, I want out, everything shifted and the world they built on trust, camera time, and tough love snapped under pressure. So, what pushed Andrei to that line? And why did the most solid couple on the show implode privately? Right when everything looked picture perfect in the weeks leading up to that quiet bombshell, something shifted. Fans thought they were just more laid back. Less social media, fewer interviews, a little less spark on camera. But the truth was way colder than anyone guessed. Andrei hadn't stopped loving loudly. He'd started retreating, not in grand dramatic exits, but in quiet patterns that, in hindsight, scream collapse. He wasn't picking fights. He wasn't storming out of the house. He was just less there. Shorter conversations, long silences, fewer jokes, fewer opinions, fewer emotions, except for irritation at tiny things like noise from the kids or unpaid bills. He'd shrug off Elizabeth's questions with, I'm tired or nothing's wrong, while his eyes said he wasn't even in the same room with her anymore. That's the part that hurt the most. Wasn't loud. Was silent, freezing, heavy. Elizabeth, who has always felt his moods before he ever speaks them, noticed. She noticed everything. The way he'd sit on the couch until 2 a.m. lost in a screen. The late nights out that had no story behind them. Even the way he'd turn away when she spoke about the future. Family trips, birthday plans, long-term ideas was like every time she reached out, she hit a wall. But she didn't push. Not because she didn't want answers, but because her whole coping style has always been to steady the ship when it starts rocking. Be the peace, keep the vibe calm, smile through it, hold it together, especially online. Their followers praise their home videos, cute couple shots, dance reels, family mornings, all real, but only half of the truth. What wasn't posted were the long stretches between filming where Elizabeth would cry in the bathroom and dry her tears before going to make breakfast, or the nights when Andrei quietly slept on the couch by accident. She told herself it was stress that work, family pressure, and all their history were just weighing on him. She tried everything, empathy, space, lightness, acts of love. But you can't fix a marriage that pretends to be one. Andrei wasn't angry. He was distant. That's how she knew it was serious. Because when someone stops fighting, it usually means they already let go. And all that emotional fog, It finally condensed into one brutal moment at their dining table. One question, one casual topic, and one answer that would leave her spiraling, stunned, and barely able to breathe. So, what exactly happened that night when all those invisible signs finally collided with one chilling truth? The kids were asleep. The house was quiet, like the kind of quiet that feels too still. Elizabeth had made dinner simple that night, not fancy, just warm. She lit a candle, maybe hoping it would feel cozy, maybe trying to steal back a bit of normal. Andrei sat at the table, his phone turned face down. No music, no TV. Just two people who had built a life around chaos now sitting in chilling silence. Elizabeth smiled gently, trying. Maybe we could plan a weekend trip with the kids. Nothing big, just something fun, she said, her voice light like a balloon, hoping it would lift the tension hanging between them. And then he looked up, eyes tired, shoulders heavy, like he'd been holding a weight far bigger than she ever realized. And he said it not sure. Can keep doing this. Think want a separation. No anger, no fight, just ice water through the heart. Her breath caught, but she didn't even speak right away because her brain needed a full reset to process what she just heard. It felt like her body heard it before her mind did. Her hands started shaking. Her chest tightened. When she finally said his name, it barely made a sound. All that she could manage was a broken what? He didn't elaborate. He didn't backtrack. He just stared at her, not cruelly, not hatefully, more like a man who had been holding it in too long. That was the sharpest pain. He had meant it. He said he felt stuck, like he'd lost himself, not in her, but in the roles he was being forced to carry. Father, husband, constant outsider, televised character, peacemaker, and protector. Underneath all of it, Andrei wasn't angry anymore. He was tired. Tired of emotionally walking on coals every time he faced Elizabeth's family. Tired of coming across like the aggressor, the foreigner, the guy who always had to prove he belonged. Tired of playing strong while feeling inadequate, isolated, and misunderstood. And Elizabeth felt herself unraveling. She didn't know where her breath went, what expression she should make, what to say, because nothing in her knew how to respond to that word coming from him, from her Andrei. And just like that, their perfect picture shattered without a single scream. Still, one question remained buried under her heartbreak. Was this a moment of mental exhaust throw dot? Or had Andrei quietly decided a long time ago that he wanted out, and this was just the first time he'd said it out loud? For years, Andrei had been performing, not just for the cameras, for everyone. From the moment he landed in the US, he wasn't a fiancé. He was a foreigner on trial. From the awkward dinners with Elizabeth's family to the interrogations about his finances and intentions, it was clear he wasn't welcomed. He was watched. He fought to hold ground, to prove himself hardworking, loyal, strong. But all that proving came at a cost. He carried it all like bricks in his chest. Every time Elizabeth's siblings raised eyebrows, every time her dad questioned his motive, Andrei swallowed it. Even when he got his green card welcome back to Drama Live. I'm Sabrina, and today we're diving into the shocking reality behind one of reality TV's so-called perfect couples. What you thought you knew about Elizabeth and Andrei is about to be completely flipped. Buckle up, because this isn't your typical breakup story. This is the quiet, simmering kind, the kind that hits harder than any screaming fight ever could. It all started in the silence of a house that looked picture perfect from the outside. Fans had watched them navigate family drama, parenthood, cultural clashes, and even on-camera blow-ups that would have destroyed most couples. They were the anchor in a storm, or at least, that's what the world believed. But behind every smile, every filtered post, every family vlog, something was quietly shifting. Andrei didn't drop this bomb during a fight. He didn't storm out or throw accusations. He chose the calmest possible moment, a dinner table when the only thing louder than his words was Elizabeth's heartbeat. One moment, she was talking about weekend trips. The next, the foundation of her life was crumbling. I can't keep doing this, he said. I think I want a separation. No anger, no screaming, just ice-cold reality piercing through her chest. The hardest part? He meant it. For months, maybe years, Andrei had been retreating, not with loud confrontations, but with silence. Short conversations, fewer jokes, long absences from shared plans. Small irritations became the only things he expressed: kids making noise, bills unpaid, minor household annoyances. But the deep connection? Gone. Elizabeth noticed. Of course she did. She had always been the first to feel his moods, the first to pick up tension before anyone else. And now, the emotional distance was undeniable. The quiet retreats, the late nights on his phone, the unexplained evenings away. It all added up. Elizabeth tried to compensate with patience, empathy, acts of love, but some gaps can't be bridged with effort alone. When someone stops fighting, when someone stops arguing, that's when you know the heart has already begun to leave. That night, the house was eerily silent. The kids were asleep, the usual background noise of life gone. Elizabeth had kept dinner simple, lit a candle, hoping to inject a bit of warmth into the evening. Maybe it was subconscious, maybe hope. It didn't matter. Andrei sat across from her, phone face down, eyes distant. And then, calmly, he spoke. No dramatics, no excuses. I can't keep doing this, he said. And in that moment, Elizabeth's world stopped. Breath caught. Heart skipped. Mind raced. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't temporary frustration. This was a man who had quietly decided he was done. For years, Andrei had been performing, not just for cameras, not just for the fans, not just for Elizabeth, but for the idea of belonging. From awkward family dinners to public appearances, from the constant pressure to be the perfect partner to the unrelenting gaze of reality TV scrutiny, he carried a weight no one could see. And it finally became too much. Elizabeth sat frozen, trying to piece together what had just happened. Every memory, every laugh, every family moment flashed through her mind. How could it all collapse in one quiet sentence? And yet, that was the power of the silent retreat. It's not the fights that end relationships. It's the absence of engagement, the slow disappearance of love in plain sight. Andrei wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't frustrated. He was exhausted. Every role he had been forced to play, husband, father, foreigner, peacemaker, TV personality, had chipped away at him. And that exhaustion wasn't dramatic. It was invisible. It was cold. And it broke Elizabeth in a way that yelling never could. So what really happened in the weeks leading up to that moment? Fans noticed subtle changes, fewer posts, less social media presence, quieter interviews, a little less spark on camera, but no one guessed the truth. The most stable couple on the show was quietly collapsing. The signs were all there if you knew how to read them. Long silences, missed opportunities for connection, small irritations building up to invisible walls. Andrei had already started checking out emotionally. And Elizabeth? She was left trying to understand, trying to hold everything together while the foundation beneath her feet eroded. And then, in the quietest moment of all, the morning after that quiet declaration, Elizabeth woke up with a sense of unreality. The house was the same, the kids were still running around with breakfast cereal in their hands, but the weight in her chest made everything feel different. The life they had built together, the image of stability and partnership, now seemed fragile, like glass under pressure. Andrei moved through the house like a shadow, present but not really there. No anger, no confrontation, just absence. Every glance he avoided, every conversation he half-heartedly engaged in, echoed louder than any screaming match they had ever endured. Elizabeth tried to maintain normalcy for the kids, for herself, and for the cameras, which always seemed to be just around the corner. But nothing about the silence could be captured on film. The cracks were invisible to the audience, but devastating in private. Weeks prior, subtle hints had been building, almost imperceptible. Andrei's laughter was quieter, his gestures less animated, his eyes often vacant during family moments. On social media, posts were minimal, filtered smiles hiding the truth, while fans speculated about less drama or maturity. In reality, the quietness was far from harmless. It was the slow unraveling of a marriage under pressure. Elizabeth questioned herself constantly. Had she missed something? Could she have done more? The videos, the public appearances, the carefully curated content. It all painted a picture of harmony. But behind the cameras, Elizabeth was piecing together moments that didn't fit the puzzle. Nights when Andrei disappeared into his phone for hours, weekends spent away with vague explanations, small irritations left unresolved. All signposts pointing to a truth she was only beginning to understand. Andrei's retreat wasn't loud, but it was relentless. He didn't argue, he didn't storm out. Instead, he simply stopped showing up emotionally. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly became stilted. Questions about the future were met with vague replies. Plans were postponed or ignored. Small gestures of affection diminished until they almost disappeared. And Elizabeth, who had always been attuned to his emotional state, felt it like a physical blow. She tried reasoning, empathizing, offering space, but the more she tried to reach him, the more distant he became. Every attempt to connect was met with a wall she couldn't break through. Friends and family noticed subtle changes too. People close to the couple started whispering about tension, about shifts that didn't make sense to fans. And in private, Elizabeth felt herself fraying at the edges, the weight of the collapse pressing down harder each day. The breaking point didn't come with fanfare. It came in quiet, cumulative moments. Andrei's exhaustion was more than physical. It was emotional, mental, and existential. Every role he had been playing, for family, for the public, for Elizabeth, had demanded more than he could give. The veneer of the perfect couple masked a man who was slowly withdrawing from life itself. And when he finally spoke, when he quietly asked for separation, it wasn't dramatic, it was devastating. Fans couldn't have imagined it. Viewers who had invested in their smiles, their family moments, their choreographed chaos, were blindsided. But reality TV, for all its drama, often hides the most personal tragedies. Elizabeth's struggle wasn't just about losing a husband. It was about reconciling the public image of her life with the private truth of her heartbreak. And in that reconciliation, the pain cut deeper than any fight could. In the days following, Elizabeth oscillated between shock and denial, hope and despair. She documented for the cameras, edited for the audience, smiled when needed. But behind closed doors, the silence of their home mirrored the silence of her own heart. Andrei's absence wasn't loud, it was a vacuum. Every shared memory became a reminder of what was slipping away, and the quiet nights made her question whether she had ever truly known him at all. The narrative of strong couple and unshakable love had been challenged by the simplest, most human of experiences, emotional withdrawal. And as Elizabeth navigated the aftermath, she began to uncover layers of their relationship that no fan had ever seen. Moments of doubt, nights of isolation, small decisions that had compounded into the biggest rupture of their life together. The drama, as always, had many layers. There were the public appearances, the social media updates, the carefully managed family content. And then there were the private moments, the texts unsent, the arguments avoided, the silent distance that only one partner fully understood. And in that private world, Elizabeth confronted the truth. Andrei had been gone emotionally long before he admitted it verbally. And that realization is what made the break so profound. Not a fight, not betrayal, not a scandal captured by cameras, just absence. Quiet, persistent, all-encompassing absence that no amount of effort could reverse. And now, with the kids asleep, the house still, and reality setting in, Elizabeth was left to navigate a new chapter of life she never wanted, filled with questions that had no immediate answers. In the quiet aftermath of that night, Elizabeth found herself replaying every memory, every shared laugh, every small conflict, and trying to pinpoint when the subtle cracks first appeared. Fans had always seen their lives as an open book, yet reality TV only ever shows fragments of life, carefully curated to maintain the narrative. What the audience didn't see, and what Elizabeth was now forced to confront, was the slow, invisible erosion of connection that had been happening right under their noses. Andrei wasn't angry, and he wasn't dramatic. He was simply gone, and the emptiness he left behind was deafening. It wasn't the kind of disappearance that could be fixed with words or gestures. It was deeper than that. Every effort to rekindle the spark, every attempt to connect, was met with polite nods, distant smiles, and a man who was physically present but emotionally elsewhere. Elizabeth had always prided herself on reading Andrei's moods, predicting his next move, understanding his frustrations before he could speak them aloud. But even she struggled with this new distance. The signs had been subtle, almost invisible to outsiders. Late nights spent scrolling through screens, vague excuses for time away from home, sudden irritability over trivial things, noise, chores, small messes. Andrei's withdrawal wasn't sudden. It had been a gradual retreat, a slow pulling away from the shared life they had once cherished. And now, in the quiet of their home, Elizabeth felt the full weight of it. The children remained blissfully unaware, wrapped in the safety of routine and parental love. But Elizabeth couldn't escape the tension. Every interaction was measured, every smile practiced. Even the family mornings, the dances, the captured moments for social media were tinged with an undercurrent of fear and uncertainty. How much longer could she maintain the facade before the cracks became visible to the world? Friends and insiders began to notice changes too. Those who had seen the couple regularly mentioned the cold distance, the subtle avoidance, and the growing absence of emotional engagement. Production teams that had once relied on their on-screen chemistry to deliver drama now sensed a shift, a quiet tension that cameras could barely capture. Elizabeth was left to navigate these uncharted waters alone, balancing the public image with her private heartbreak. The truth of Andrei's emotional retreat was layered. It wasn't a single moment, a single argument, or a betrayal. It was a pattern, a slow accumulation of choices, small silences, and subtle avoidance. Every conversation left her feeling smaller. Every plan postponed chipped away at the bond they had built. And the worst part? Andrei didn't want confrontation. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted to be elsewhere, emotionally untethered, free from the roles that had defined him for so long. Elizabeth tried to interpret, rationalize, and even forgive, but the silence was louder than any explanation he could have offered. She tried to maintain her own sense of stability, focusing on the kids, the house, and the life she had always imagined. But no amount of effort could fill the emotional vacuum left by a partner who had quietly checked out. This is the paradox of reality TV relationships. The world sees drama, conflict, and chaos, but the quiet, invisible deterioration is far more devastating. The audience applauds reconciliations, celebrates family moments, and praises resilience, but rarely do they witness the silent unraveling that precedes public collapse. For Elizabeth, every smile she gave the cameras was a mask, a necessary facade to protect not only herself, but the image of a life that no longer existed in its entirety. In retrospect, the signs were there all along. The subtle emotional distancing, the long silences, the avoidance of meaningful conversations. Andrei hadn't stormed out or yelled. He had simply stopped investing, stopped showing up, and the cumulative effect was catastrophic. Elizabeth felt betrayed not by words, but by absence, the absence of emotional intimacy that had once been the foundation of their life together. And yet, the human mind seeks answers, even when none exist. Elizabeth questioned herself endlessly. Had she missed something crucial? Could she have done something differently? Could love have survived under these conditions? The answers were elusive, buried in the slow, quiet retreat of someone she had once considered her partner in every sense. Behind the carefully staged videos, the curated content, and the family smiles, there were nights of tears, moments of solitude, and a growing realization that their marriage, once thought unshakable, was unraveling from within. It was a collapse that had no fanfare, no dramatic confrontation, just the quiet, relentless erosion of connection until the foundation gave way at the glow of his phone, evenings out with vague excuses, long silences at home. Each moment a quiet confirmation that the man she loved was slowly checking out. The signs had been there all along, subtle but undeniable. The absence of spark, the avoidance of meaningful conversations, the small irritations growing into emotional walls. And now, in the aftermath of that fateful dinner, Elizabeth was forced to confront what fans couldn't see. Their marriage was unraveling quietly, invisibly, and irreversibly. Elizabeth tried to maintain normalcy for the kids, for the cameras, and for herself. She smiled for the social media clips, laughed at family dances, pretended to engage with Andrei like nothing had changed. But beneath it all, she was unraveling. Every moment of silence, every glance avoided, every unspoken thought pressed down on her, leaving her questioning everything she once believed about love, commitment, and partnership. Friends and insiders began noticing too. Those close to the couple whispered about tension, emotional distance, and subtle shifts that didn't make sense to fans. Production teams, who had relied on their chemistry for content, sensed the change, the quiet tension that could no longer be ignored. And in private, Elizabeth was forced to navigate this uncharted emotional territory alone, balancing the public image of a perfect family with the private truth of heartbreak and emotional abandonment. Andrei's withdrawal was not sudden. It had been gradual and insidious. Months, maybe years of small retreats. A shorter answer to a question, a shrug instead of engagement, turning away when she talked about plans, long nights spent working or scrolling through his phone. Each small distance compounded into an invisible wall between them, and Elizabeth was left to try and patch cracks she couldn't even see. The paradox of reality TV relationships is that audiences see only the dramatic moments, the fights, the reconciliations, the on-camera confessions. They never see the quiet disintegration happening off-camera, the small silences, the tiny emotional withdrawals, the accumulation of moments that eventually destroy a bond. Elizabeth realized she was living that paradox firsthand. For every cute TikTok, every filtered smile, every laugh shared on camera, there was a private reality full of tears, doubts, and emotional distance. Andrei wasn't angry. He wasn't vindictive. He wasn't explosive. He was simply exhausted, mentally, emotionally, and existentially. Every role he had been forced to play, from husband to father to public figure, had left him depleted. And when he finally voiced the words that shattered Elizabeth's world, it wasn't a tantrum or a confrontation. It was the quiet declaration of a man who had already emotionally walked away, leaving only the hollow shell of what had been their life together. Elizabeth's coping mechanisms, empathy, patience, acts of love, were no match for absence. She tried to connect, to reason, to rekindle the spark, but each attempt met with polite distance. Every smile returned by Andrei felt rehearsed, every conversation half-hearted, every affectionate gesture missing. The marriage was no longer a shared journey. It was a series of parallel lives running side by side, never truly intersecting. And then came the nights of solitude, the ones no camera ever captured. Elizabeth alone in the bathroom, tears quietly drying before stepping into family moments. Andrei asleep on the couch, pretending the distance didn't exist. These were the moments that defined the true collapse. Not screaming, not betrayal, but absence. Emotional absence. The slow withdrawal of a man who had silently decided to leave. Fans noticed subtle changes too. Fewer posts, quieter interviews, less engagement, a dwindling presence online. Everyone assumed it was normal, that perhaps they were more private, more reflective, or simply taking a break. But the truth was far colder. The perfect couple everyone admired was disintegrating in silence, and the world had no idea how fragile the foundation had become. Elizabeth's internal struggle was compounded by her desire to maintain appearances. Social media, family outings, public statements, everything required a composed version of herself, while privately she grappled with disbelief, anger, sadness, and fear. Every interaction with Andrei was a negotiation, every smile a performance, every word carefully measured. She was performing not for the audience alone, but for the survival of her own heart amidst a storm of emotional collapse. And yet, through it all, the questions remained. Had this moment been inevitable? Had Andrei quietly decided months, or even years ago, that he wanted out? Or was this the result of emotional exhaustion, of too many roles and expectations crushing the man he once was? Elizabeth had no immediate answers, only the ongoing experience of living in a marriage that existed more in memory than in reality. The quiet, relentless retreat of a partner is devastating because it leaves no scene for confrontation, no dramatic outburst for resolution. It is a slow, invisible erosion of intimacy, trust, and emotional connection. And for Elizabeth, every layer of this retreat felt like a betrayal not of actions, but of presence, the absence of the man who had once been the emotional center of her life. As the days passed, Elizabeth began to reconstruct the timeline in her mind. The early signs she had missed, the subtle distancing, the gradual decline in emotional engagement, and the moments of quiet withdrawal that had led to the ultimate declaration at the dinner table. Each memory, each small instance of absence, coalesced into a single, chilling truth. The foundation of their life together had been quietly crumbling for far longer than anyone realized. Elizabeth couldn't help but replay that dinner moment in her mind endlessly. Andrei's calm, measured words, the ones that had pierced her heart, kept echoing in the silence of their home. "I can't keep doing this. I think I want a separation." No dramatic scene, no shouting, no pointing fingers, just quiet devastation. And that quietness made it worse. It was deliberate. It was final. It was the conclusion of months, maybe years, of emotional withdrawal. Andrei's retreat wasn't noticeable at first. It started with small things, shorter conversations, the absence of laughter, fewer shared plans. Elizabeth noticed, of course she did, but she attributed it to stress, work, family responsibilities, anything but the slow erosion of their emotional bond. She tried to compensate, to fill the gaps with her own energy, optimism, and acts of love. But even her unwavering effort couldn't penetrate the walls he had been building quietly around himself. In private, the household became a landscape of absence. Andrei was physically present, but emotionally distant. He avoided eye contact, skipped meaningful discussions, and seemed exhausted by the smallest interactions. Elizabeth, who had always been sensitive to his moods, felt the growing void like a physical ache. She tried reaching out, asking questions, suggesting family trips, initiating small acts of intimacy. But each attempt was met with polite detachment, leaving her feeling invisible in the very home they had built together. Friends, family, and even production staff began noticing subtle signs, too. Those close to the couple whispered about emotional distance, unexplained absences, and small irritations turning into persistent tension. And while fans continued to see the curated life, the smiles, the dances, the family mornings, the reality behind the camera was increasingly fractured. Andrei's emotional retreat was systematic and quiet. There were no explosive arguments, no public betrayals, just a slow withdrawal from participation. Nights spent on his phone, vague. Excuses for time away, minimal engagement with the children. These were all pieces of a puzzle Elizabeth was forced to piece together under immense emotional strain. And when Andrei finally voiced the words of separation, it wasn't a moment of anger or confrontation. It was the release of a man who had already detached from his life and family emotionally. Elizabeth's coping mechanisms were pushed to their limits. Her patience, empathy, and attempts to reconnect could not fill the void left by Andrei's absence. Every attempt at communication felt like hitting a wall. Every smile she returned to him was hollow. Every interaction a performance. Every affectionate gesture unreciprocated. Their marriage was no longer a partnership. It was a series of parallel existences, moving alongside each other without true connection. The paradox of reality TV relationships is starkly visible here. The audience sees the dramatic fights, the reconciliations, the confessions, but rarely do they witness the slow, invisible disintegration of intimacy. Elizabeth was living that paradox firsthand. For every adorable family video or dance reel, there were nights of tears, quiet solitude, and a growing understanding that the man she loved was emotionally gone. In retrospect, the signs had been building for months. Andrei had started disengaging subtly, slowly, until his presence felt more like a ghost than a partner. Long silences, postponed plans, minimal conversation, irritability over trivial matters, these small withdrawals compounded over time into a complete collapse. And Elizabeth, despite her intuition and emotional sensitivity, was left grappling with the realization that love alone could not bridge the growing chasm. The emotional vacuum created by Andrei's withdrawal was suffocating. It wasn't anger that hurt, it was absence. Absence of connection, absence of engagement, absence of the man who had once been her anchor. And as Elizabeth navigated the quiet home, surrounded by children and routine, The reality of a marriage slowly dissolving in silence became unavoidable. Elizabeth tried rationalizing, reflecting, and reconstructing the timeline of their disconnect. Every moment of distance, every late night, every conversation that had been cut short or dismissed, all of it formed a narrative that was impossible to ignore. The marriage, once thought strong and resilient, had been quietly eroding from within, leaving her to contend with a painful truth. The life she had built was no longer secure, no longer intact, no longer shared in the way she believed it was. And yet, despite the devastation, life continued. The children needed her presence, the household demanded attention, and the cameras, ever present, needed continuity. Elizabeth performed, smiled, laughed, and carried on with an internal storm raging beneath her composed exterior. Every social media post, every vlog, every public appearance was a mask, a shield, a desperate attempt to preserve the image of family and stability while her personal reality was being dismantled piece by piece. Andrei, meanwhile, remained quiet. No arguments, no confrontations, no accusations, just a man retreating into a world where he no longer felt tethered to the emotional demands of marriage. His absence was both deliberate and devastating, and Elizabeth was left to navigate the consequences alone. The foundation of their life together, painstakingly built over years of love, patience, and shared experience, was quietly, systematically dissolving. As the days turned into weeks, Elizabeth found herself living in a dual reality. On one side was the world everyone else saw, a loving mother, a devoted partner, and a family that appeared whole. On the other side was the private truth, the emotional absence of Andrei, the quiet fracture in their marriage, and the creeping sense that the foundation of her life was no longer secure. Every smile she gave the cameras masked a storm inside, every laugh a shield against the heartbreak of watching the person she loved drift away in silence. Andrei's disengagement was methodical, almost imperceptible at first. Early signs, a shrug, a missed glance, a postponed conversation, had escalated into weeks of emotional distance. He was physically present, but mentally and emotionally absent. Elizabeth tried to reach him through empathy, through acts of love, through patience, but nothing penetrated the walls he had built. Each day of quiet withdrawal made the eventual separation inevitable, and each attempt she made to connect was met with polite detachment that cut deeper than any argument could. The children, blissfully unaware, carried on with their routines, and Elizabeth held the weight of reality alone. She managed meals, school routines, and family activities with the same grace she always had, but the emotional labor was now doubled, caring for the children while navigating a marriage that had quietly collapsed. Every interaction with Andrei, once a source of joy, became a reminder of absence. Every shared moment was haunted by what was missing: the engagement, the warmth, the emotional reciprocity that once defined their relationship. Friends and insiders began whispering about subtle changes. Those close to the couple noticed the cold distance, the unexplained absences, and the growing tension that never erupted into public conflict. Fans, however, saw only carefully curated smiles, stage dances, and Instagram-perfect family moments. They applauded stability, unity, and strong couple energy, completely unaware that the private reality was far more complex, far more painful. The quiet retreat of Andrei's emotional presence created a vacuum. It wasn't anger, betrayal, or confrontation that destroyed the marriage. It was absence. The slow, invisible erosion of connection, of intimacy, and of trust left Elizabeth navigating a life that appeared intact but was hollow at its core. Nights alone, tears silently wiped away, moments of longing unfulfilled, all underscored the stark contrast between public perception and private reality. Elizabeth found herself questioning everything. Had she missed warning signs? Could she have done something differently? Could love, patience, and effort have bridged the gap? The answers were elusive. The more she analyzed, the clearer it became. This was not a sudden breakdown, but a collapse that had been quietly occurring for months, even years. Andrei's final words at the dinner table, the request for separation, were not impulsive. They were the culmination of a slow retreat, a carefully constructed disengagement that had been building momentum long before the words were spoken. And yet, the absence of drama made it all the more devastating. There was no catharsis in a fight, no closure in confrontation, just the cold, piercing reality of someone emotionally walking away while life went on around them. In the aftermath, Elizabeth's role shifted dramatically. She became not only the caregiver for her children, but also the curator of appearances, maintaining the illusion of a happy family for fans, friends, and the public. Every vlog, every Instagram post,